Okay, members, we have an apology from David McElveen and from Alex Maskey. Alex Maskey, okay. Anything else? No? I'll delay as there's nobody in the public gallery.
Okay.
Not much point in instructing them. Here they go. Well, it says here that those in the public gallery who wish to use their mobiles can do so in airplane mode with a mute, and then they can connect to Assembly Wi-Fi. But the data's way ahead of us and has already done it, as I happen to know. So I think we'll just press on, will we? Okay. Members, at page 5 of your packs, you'll see an invitation from Ulster University. It's the launch of a report called What Survivors Want from Redress. It's here in Parliament Buildings on the 15th of the month. It's an independent initiative by key stakeholders, and they're going to present an overview of the findings and recommendations in the report. And it's also referred to in the briefing paper we received from Amnesty and Savia, which is at page 151 of your packs. Should you wish to attend that event here, please contact the university directly. In table to page 4, there's an invitation to a Consumer Council event. It's part of their consultation on the draft corporate plan of the Consumer Council for 2016 to 2021 and their forward work programme for the year 16-17. And again, please contact the Council directly if you wish to get involved. At page 6 in the main pack is a list of current committee invitations. We move on to the draft minutes. I refer you to the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of February, beginning at page 9, and ask, are members content to agree the draft minutes of the meeting of the 24th of February? Thank you. The list of outstanding correspondence begins at page 15. In the absence of comment, we move on to the summary sheets of correspondence received since we last met. That's page 26. I draw your attention, members, to the quarterly update for the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels. That's page 32. Last week it was agreed that in future that office might issue the update directly to statutory committees at the same time as other stakeholders. However, this issue will not have been forwarded directly, so are you content to forward this update to the other statutory committees? Thank you. Any other matters relating to correspondence? If not, the draft forward work programme is at page 63. Next week, we are due to hear from the First Minister and Deputy First Ministers, and that will be followed by a briefing from departmental officials on the programme for government. Members, a session on SIF, on the Social Investment Fund, was on the work programme and has been for some time. However, given it will inevitably be discussed in our discussions with the ministers and then with officials on the programme for government, I would suggest we could do without a specific third briefing on SIF, because it will inevitably be duplication. So are members content? Thank you. Any other comments on the forward work programme? So we're content with it as discussed. Thank you. Now we have to consider a draft report on the forthcoming legislative consent motion on the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill. In your packs, the clerk's brief is at page 66, the draft report 67. Then entabled is the actual legislative consent memorandum, that's page 7 of tabled. Back to the main pack, you have a copy of the bill at page 75, the explanatory notes at page 86, and correspondence from the Committee for Justice at page 99. So, members, can I ask you, as an opening position, to turn to page 67 of your main packs. And there you'll see paragraphs 1 to 12, which are a factual account of our consideration of the LCM and its proposals to date. So, the first question is, any comments on paras 1 to 12, members? Okay, paragraph 13 then relates to the Committee for Finance and Personnel's consideration of the LCM. Now, they had previously agreed to seek an urgent response from the Department of Finance and Personnel in relation to the provisions relevant to its remit. However, a response from DFP was not received in time to be considered at their meeting last week. And in view of the time constraints, the committee, the Finance and Personnel Committee, agreed that the response from DFP would be forwarded once received, and it has been in our table pack at page 10. So we have a draft paragraph 13 outlining DFP's views for insertion in the report, and that again is in table packs at page 14. So members, I ask if any of you have any comments on this paragraph, or indeed do you want a moment to further consider? Okay, in the absence of comments, members, if we go back to the main pack on page 73, you'll see that there is a choice here, the inclusion of either paragraph 14 or paragraph 15, dependent, of course, on whether we as a committee agree to support the LCM. Everybody content so far?
I have a number of comments to make about the whole thing.
Okay.
The first is that whatever decision, I don't intend to oppose or resist the LCM, but the SDLP plans to table amendments in the London processes around the bill in order to enhance the bill, seek clarity within the bill. And generally make it a more rigorous approach. So whatever judgment I or the party makes here in terms of the LCM
is without prejudice.
Without prejudice to the fact that we are making proposals in London.
I think the same, in fairness, would apply to the Ulster Unionist Party, who are certainly giving active consideration.
I think there is remarkable lack of insight or explanation about what's happening around the budget processes. So we're going to have this requirement every year to table a report from London about what the allocation is for the year, and that allocation can't be breached. Yet we're not clear whether that means there'll be an enhanced budget process here, and the Minister of Finance was no clearer on that in the debate last week on the final stage of the budget bill. The proposals in respect of the ministerial code and the responsibilities of MLAs, that's enhanced for the Fresh Start. Well, whether or not people are actually living up to those words is a matter to be judged in real time, in the real world. But those words don't extend to councillors. So the councillors have an oath for non-violence, but they don't have commitments further to those Fresh Start new words in relation to commitment to the rule of law. And ultimately, the processes around this LCM have been very limited. They've been in a very short time frame. DFP are making comment without getting any comment from DFP. The DFP committee are making comment about and getting information from DFP. So the process is just utterly inadequate in terms of obligations that will fall to ministers, to MLAs, to executive, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to resist this going forward, because there's elements that are good, some elements that are very good, but it's all subject to those comments, subject to what we may do in Westminster.
Okay, members, so it's now on the record that at least two parties of this committee are looking to their their Westminster teams to potentially bring forward amendments at Westminster but that is without prejudice to what this committee should decide with regard to the LCM. Excuse me, any other comments?
Has the LCM been endorsed by the executive yet? Not.
No, I don't think we'll have got to the executive, but
Sure, sorry. I think
we.
it was-
So it has been.
I would,
Well, it may have been. May have been.
Is it in the papers? Is it in Monday, Tuesday's business?
Next week, do we know?
no, I think it might be on 15th, Chair. 15th, yeah.
Okay.
But we know that the Fresh Start itself was endorsed by 2 of the 4 parties of the executive.
Chair, sorry, my understanding would be that LCMs generally wouldn't be laid unless they have been cleared by the executive.
Would it have?
Yeah. So, and this, the memorandum has already been laid, which is why the committee has to, within 15 days, under standing orders, bring this report forward. That 15 days will be up this Friday.
Okay. Understand.
Okay. So it is a formal question, members. I'm asking that the Committee of the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister supports the legislative consent motion on the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill. We all agree. Okay, thank you very much. So based on that, are members content with the wording of paragraph 14 and paragraph 15 consequently will be deleted? Yep. Okay. So then, are members content to approve the draft report, remembering that 1 to 12 are basically the factual history of our considerations, 13 is the paragraph from the Committee of Finance and Personnel, which we were looking at and tabled, and 14 is what we've just agreed with 15 dropped. All content? Happiness? And just one last thing, members. At page 73 of the main pack is a list of the appendices to the report, and I must ask formally, are you content to approve the appendices to the report? Thank you. Excellent. We now move on to consider the proposal for the Department's Transfer of Functions Order, Northern Ireland 2016, which we have considered at our meeting on the 10th of February. The committee then agreed it was content for the order to be made, but recommended a review be undertaken 6 months after it comes into operation. Since considering the subordinate legislation number 1, a number of changes, mainly technical in nature, have been made, and these are listed at page 106 of your main pack, and then the order follows at page 107. It wasn't laid in time for inclusion in the Examiner of Statutory Rules' most recent report, however. He has indicated by email that he has no points to raise by way of his technical scrutiny. For information, a copy of that email is in your table at page 21. The order will be included in the next report by the Examiner. Before I put the formal question, do members have any comments? In which case the question is that the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered SR 2016/76, Department's Transfer of Functions Order, Northern Ireland 2016, and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. We are all agreed? Thank you.
Again, Chair, in agreeing that it's without prejudice the comments that we'll be making on the floor, because there's incongruity within the transfer function order. You transfer functions, but you don't transfer the function of nomination of the Children's Commissioner, or the Older People's Commissioner, and so on and so forth. That's the way I'm going to measure up.
Again, formally noted. Now, members, can I refer you to an additional agenda item relating to the restructuring of departments? Because the Departments Bill received royal assent on the 29th of February. It's known as the Departments Act, brackets Northern Ireland 2016. And at page 26 of your table pack, you'll see a commencement order in relation to the Act. And Schedule 1 the Northern Ireland Departments and Schedule 2 repeals will come into operation on the 8th of May of this year, and that is to note. And following the commencement order, members will find a ministerial determination at page 25 of your table pack, and this reflects the ministerial positions following the restructuring of the Northern Ireland departments, and it will form the basis for filling ministerial offices in the next Assembly mandate. The determination is subject to approval by resolution of the Assembly to be passed with cross-community support. And again, that is just for noting, but I will pause if there are any comments from members. In which case we move on to agenda item 9, SR 2016, number 35, and that is the Salaries, Assembly Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints Order, Northern Ireland, 2016. We considered the proposal for this at the meeting on the 27th of January, and the committee was content for it to be made. A copy of the statutory rule is in your packet, page 137. The examiner of statutory rules had no comments to make by way of technical scrutiny, and for information, that report is in the table papers at page 18. And it is proposed that the rule will come into operation retrospectively with effect from the 1st of April 2015. And for the avoidance of doubt, this is the salary of Dr. Tom Frawley. In the absence of questions, or comments, I'll move to the formal question. That the Committee for the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister has considered SR 2016/35, the Salaries, Assembly Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints Order, Northern Ireland, 2016, and has no objection to the rule. Are members content? They are. Thank you very much. Next, page 143 of your pack is a policy proposal from the Assembly Commission setting the salary of the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman under our new legislation. The clerk has provided a brief at page 142. As you know, the Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints salary was based on the salary scales of the judiciary. But following consideration by the Assembly Commission, there is a recommendation the salary for the Ombudsman is set at £92,000 per annum. It's expected a motion to appoint the Ombudsman will be debated in plenary on the 8th of March, and that the appointment will be effective from the 1st of April. And this rule, therefore, will come into operation on the same date, April the 1st. Members, have we any comments to make? This is a significant reduction in salary. Very significant, I would suggest. So, are members content with this proposed rule? Thank you. Once the draft order has been laid in the Business Office, it will be provided for consideration by the committee along with a relevant report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. So, thank you, members. That was quite a heavy little workload we've got through in terms of business. We now go to briefings, and we're going to hear from Amnesty International UK and Savia on the inquiries for groups not covered by the HIA inquiry, and also the provisional redress for victims falling within the remit of the current historical institutional abuse inquiry. Clerk's brief is at page 147. A briefing paper has been provided by Amnesty and Savia. That's at page 150. Previous correspondence from Amnesty and Savia dated June 2015 is at page 152. OFMDFM's response of the 3rd of February 2016 is at page 156, and the options paper from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister dated the 16th of February is at page 158. And we welcome to committee today Patrick Corrigan, the Programme Director of Amnesty International UK, and Margaret McGugan, Secretary of Survivors and Victims of Institutional Abuse.
Chairperson, Mike, and Secretary.
Chair and Secretary.
General Dogs.
And bottle washer.
Eh?
And bottle washer. And coffee maker.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not be changing.
Okay. I am not going to presume who's speaking first. I'm just simply passing over.
Okay, I'm going to kick off. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for inviting us here. We much appreciate the opportunity to give you an update from our perspective on where things stand. So we have provided you with just a short bullet point briefing note, and really just to cover the main points of that. First of all, around the groups of abuse victims who aren't covered by the HIA inquiry. And this was first raised with OFMDFM at the time the terms of reference were being drawn up for the HIA inquiry back really in 2012, and it was accepted that that inquiry was going to focus on victims of abuse for residential children's institutions, and that other categories would be, if you like, would be returned to by the OFMDFM in due course. It's clear at the moment there is a disparity between the treatment of one group of abuse victims and those who aren't covered by the inquiry. And from an Amnesty International point of view, we're clear that those victims are victims of human rights violations, that there were systemic abuses. The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Committee Against Torture have both picked up on the fact that there have not been investigative processes put in place for those categories of victims, and have made recommendations accordingly, and that those recommendations date back to reports from summer 2013. So we have met with OFMDFM ministers or junior ministers on a number of occasions over the last number of years on this issue, and were informed at different points that there were scoping papers commissioned from officials. I think in 2013 there was a scoping paper on Magdalene Laundry, mother and baby homes, and subsequently in 2014, I think late in 2014, there was to be received a scoping paper again on the same category, but also on clerical abuse victims. We asked for, I suppose, some information sharing about what they had found in terms of the scoping and what the options were. We didn't get that information shared with us, but we made clear that we believed there needed to be independent, effective inquiries into the abuse that they suffered. We understand, although we haven't received any formal communication from the department, that a decision was taken recently at the executive on the options. We understand that among the options, and we have this information from a response that one of the junior ministers gave back to the Assembly in June 2015, that among the options were for the establishment of statutory inquiry into abuse suffered by women in mother and baby homes, and another option was that the Department of Health would be tasked to review the situation and to make recommendations. We understand that the latter has been now decided upon by the executive, although we're still waiting for formal communication on that. There seems to perhaps be a similar process accepted for clerical abuse victims. So based on the information we have, I think victims are relieved that something is happening, because it has felt, I think, for them for quite a long time that there has been an awful lot of process but no outcome, no action, certainly no inquiry. This appears to be further process with the prospect of further options for consideration down the line. So I think that frustration still exists among the various victims groups concerned, but at least they have seen some outcome out of OFMDFM, although it now simply seems to have been passed to Department of Health to head up an interdepartmental working group on the matter. So I suppose we have been disappointed at the lack of progress over the last 3 or 4 years. In that period, there has been the Irish government, for instance, by comparison, has established the Martin McAleese Review. Was an interdepartmental working party there that did make recommendations, and that has led to a redress process. Similarly, there has been established a commission of inquiry into experiences of women in mother and baby homes. Here we're still waiting for really any concrete outcome. So I think victims are committed, and Amnesty is committed to engaging with the Department of Health if that indeed is the process that's going forward. On redress, when the HIA inquiry was being created, victims had certainly initially made clear that their preference was for a parallel process of redress. So there was significant compromise on the victim side to accept that a redress process, if it was to come, would come after the inquiry had finally reported. That final report was to have already received by the executive at this stage in January 2016. It was decided to extend the inquiry by a year, and at that point Savvy and Amnesty jointly wrote to the ministers recommending that in light of the delayed final report, that they should do two things. One is that they should set up an interim redress process, and two, they should start work themselves in scoping out what a redress process might look like in advance of receiving Sir Anthony's report in January 2017. We haven't had any formal response from the Department on those proposals sent in March 2015, but in the meantime, Sir Anthony has announced in November of last year that he would be recommending, when he reports, he would be recommending that a redress process be established by the Executive, and it's a matter for the Executive to determine what that will look like. And meanwhile, also, the various victims groups, and there are a number of victims groups involved here, alongside Amnesty International, local and international academics and legal experts from this and other jurisdictions, have come together to form an expert panel on redress, and we have consulted deeply and broadly with victims affected under the HIA inquiry, and will be making two reports, one on March 15th, to which all MLAs have been invited, and there will be a subsequent report setting out a model redress scheme based on what victims want, and also based on international standards and precedents, and that will be published just after the Assembly elections and before the summer recess. And we hope that that work will prove useful both to Sir Anthony and to OFMDFM and more broadly the Executive in coming to conclusions about a redress scheme.
Yeah, it just seems that we have to be pursuing at every level and doing things ourselves, and even getting a seminar together of all victims and doing our own consultation paper with victims as to what they want. And now we're sort of trying to lead the way, having models on redress and inviting people from Canada, the Netherlands, Australia over to meet with us and sit at seminars, you know, to learn from each other. And it seems that we're doing all the chasing. And, you know, we've met with officials, I don't know, many times over the years. We get nothing back, or we're drip-fed, practically, may I say, nonsense, you know. Well, it makes no sense. You know, it's nothing that we want. We want what we really want to know. You know, we don't seem to be getting anywhere. We want something concrete. Now, talking about the parallel, you know, when the inquiry started, we did wanted it, a redress set up going parallel with the inquiry, and we give way to that because we didn't think it would have went on this long. And then, in light of Hart's extension, you know, we thought that with compassion and as a gesture, the government would have got together with the churches and to set up a redress scheme. You know, an interim payment, which we've discussed with various members and MLAs, and we've got much support on that, but we were just waiting on the DUP coming back with some sort of support on that. Now, there's so many people who have come to the inquiry and they've just sadly passed away, and this has went on for years and years. I've been doing this from 2008. You know, that's 7.5 years. And I don't want to be seen to be coming up here again and again and again. You know, it's wearing me down as much as, you know, so many people have just passed away. And I thought that our government, when they said in front of the TV cameras, you know, how sympathetic they were and how they would work for the people, you know, that they would have done something like they did down the south and other countries worldwide. They looked after their people, and it seems as if our people are not being looked after. You know, and no longer can anyone say that it's about the Roman Catholic Church, because the people that I'm with, and it's a joy to be with them, are from Kincora, Rothgale, Lisieux, you know, and various denominations. And we have a great, lovely group, and, you know, we're leading by example in cross-community relations. And, you know, they feel ostracised too. The people that I'm with, and we had a meeting with the DUP there not so long ago up in one of the rooms, you know. But they're feeling as if everything's just been left to the one side and just wait on the inquiry. I've asked, has anybody had any meetings with the church or the religious orders, and it doesn't seem to have taken place at all. Now, I've had to pass over names and addresses of all the jurisdictions, from the top bishops to the cardinal, and running about and having meetings with them myself. And it just seems to be one fudge after another. And I don't think it's right for people. You know, and if I can go on maybe to why there should be an inquiry into the clerical abuse. You know, although this institutional abuse had covered the institutions, you know, what is going to happen to the people who were abused in them institutions by priests, whether they were visiting priests or the priests that belonged to it? Now, I can talk about my brother. What's going to happen to him? You know, he's in the care home now because of his sexual and physical abuse throughout that time. He's damaged because he's just like a child of that was in the institution, you know. He's actually 60. He's 60, but he's still stuck in the past. So, although they'll talk about the institutional abuse, these priests seem to be getting away. I can talk about Kate, she wouldn't mind me saying that. You know, what we're getting back from people is they're too ill, or the PSNI, it's too historical for them that they can't do nothing really about it. They're investigating, they say, to the best of their ability, but they're going nowhere. They can't, because it's so historical, they say, you know, there's not enough evidence or they're ill. But I believe that there should be an inquiry into why this was allowed to happen, and they can trace, you know, any priests. Look what's happening worldwide. Look what's happening in Australia now too. You know, and I think our government owes that to properly investigate these places and not let the church. You know, I'm talking about the Church of Ireland too, because you know, the non-denominational here. You know, they needed to be totally investigated and not let off, because at the moment what they're saying, it's all to do with the religious orders. Now, they're detaching themselves again, and that cannot be allowed, and we need a government that's strong enough to bring them to book and to get them to the table and start this redress scheme, because they cannot get away with it. That's the only type of justice that we seem to be only, maybe, perhaps, are going to be able to get, because I don't think that they're going to be tried and prosecuted or sentenced for the abuse that they've had on many hundreds of people.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick, a couple of follow-ups before I bring in other members. Patrick, you expressed the dissatisfaction and disappointment that there is no investigative process or no investigative processes for those who fall out with the terms of reference, the HIA inquiry. And yet, many times I have heard a ministerial response from the department that says if you do fall out with and you are a victim, you should go to the police or you should go to social services. Are those not investigative processes?
They are not investigative processes in terms of investigating the systemic failure or the systemic abuse suffered by these individuals. I mean, taking isolated cases for criminal complaint is one thing, and we would always recommend that people go forward to the police to make such a complaint, however historic the incident was. But what we have identified, as has been identified in numerous other jurisdictions, is that the problem went beyond single isolated incidences of abuse, and that there was a systemic problem here. Certainly, if one looks at the experience of mother and baby homes / Magdalen laundries, these were institutions that essentially the state had devolved responsibility or delegated responsibility to look after women, babies, small children. And so there's a direct chain of responsibility there to the government in terms of the failings to ensure that the abuses that we know took place were allowed to take place, and were allowed to take place for successive generations. In terms of clerical abuse, again, has been identified in other jurisdictions, including across the border. There were feelings by the state as well as by the institution. In this case, in the Republic, we were talking about the Catholic Church. There are incidences within other religious institutions in Northern Ireland as well at fault. But there we saw feelings by the state to adequately investigate when complaints were put forward, and there was almost an undue deference by the state given towards the religious institution and towards the abusers, and so we have only seen successful prosecutions in quite a small number of cases. Yet we know, even from the Catholic Church's own National Board for Safeguarding Children, who've carried out a number of diocesan reviews into incidences of abuse in Northern Ireland, we know that there were scores of complaints, that there were scores of priests in this case involved, hundreds cases of victims, and that only a small proportion of those ever went through any criminal justice process. So it's not sufficient to simply refer people on to social services or to the PSNI. This is a bigger problem, and in terms of international human rights standards, there is an obligation on the state to investigate at a broader level, and that has been recognised by various UN bodies.
One of the big developments since Sir Anthony Hart began his investigation, Patrick, I think, is his announcement, which you referred to, that he would recommend redress, although he hasn't been specific. If you are a victim falling out with access to that inquiry, is that not a game changer, even if the PSNI and social services were capable of a robust investigative process, that those who do have access to HIA are now being told there will be redress for you?
Yes, I mean, he is only able to make recommendations for the establishment of a redress scheme for those victims that come under his terms of reference. So, we hope to see such a redress scheme established, but again, it will be for a particular group of victims, those covered by its TORs, and not for others. Ultimately, it's up to the OFMDFM and the executive to determine what scheme gets put in place. It's perfectly possible that the executive could establish a broader scheme involving the victims from the HIA inquiry, as well as other processes or falling under other categories. Again, if not, there will be simply a further level of disparity of treatment for those victims as opposed to others.
Yeah, I think Sir Anthony did do that, given our government here a heads up, because we have close contact too, and he knew our desires, and he knew about how many people were passing away, and in light of the extension, so that was highly favoured what Sir Anthony did, and it was well applauded and accepted. But I think that's what he did, and it was for the government here to say, get a move on. No longer can you say we can't preempt the end of the inquiry, because that's all we were hearing. So I do believe that he had concern, and he closely watches what goes on in other nations as well. We're aware of that. And I know that there is a relationship there where he is saying without a doubt, there was systemic abuse, and that's why I said unprecedentedly that he said one of the recommendations is going to be compensation, and I believe he said that for the, give the time and the space there to get something set up.
Margaret, you mentioned, I think, 3 times people passing away since you started 8 years ago. How many roughly? Can you put a figure on the number of victims who passed away?
The ones maybe that I know, could it be 50?
50?
Yeah. Yeah.
Through old age?
Old age, or just, and I think, do you know what has happened?
50?
I would say 50, maybe, that I'm not aware of, but the gauging, because I know how old people are and how affected and mentally unstable and unwell that they were. The many people that I've spoke to and met, and there my brother is in and out of hospital too, with issues relating to his abuse in the past, and that's how many are affected, and they're just not well. And I feel as if I've promised them that something will happen, and to go back to them and they're all half given up. They've just given up, and who can we trust?
So what is the impact as 50 pass away on those who are left behind?
Yeah.
As they see people passing away and relative inaction, delays in a report, a refusal to look at redress until the report is finished and presented?
So disillusioned, and they've lost trust, and I believe that, and I hope they haven't lost trust in me too, and that's why I will not stop, and I don't get much sleep at all, because this is constantly on my mind, because I feel as if I started this with the petition, and I just kept doing the media and whatever, and I'm in contact with so many hundreds of people, and I'm never off the phone to them, and I'm just saying, hang in there, but I'm embarrassed and ashamed now that our government haven't stood by their promises, and they haven't come round our people, because they are very sensitive people, vulnerable people, damaged people. They need to be, in this programme for government, I would suggest that they get something ready and get the redress levels ready for May, to show the people out there, both sides of the community, that they can run this government and run it properly.
You talked about nonsense when you talk to
Yeah.
government officials, that what you hear is nonsense, not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? I mean, does that say something about the attitude of the officials you're talking to?
Across the board, well, what I'm getting is, you know, we'll be talking to the OFDFM and the civil servants, and yes, we'll get back and we'll have to get that into a paper or a working group. And it's all this language and, you know, lingo that, you know, at the beginning, Mike, years ago, and we were delighted that we had support of the government, and I said it quite often on the media. And if you keep hearing this repeated nonsense.
So are they talking about the processes of government?
Yeah.
Trying to say to you, look, you don't understand, this is how government works, and you just have to like it or lump it,
But
effectively.
no, we keep hearing the same things, and we don't see any movement. There's no movement. There's no moving forward.
Right.
You know, or it's you can't preempt and you can't preempt. And I knew that Mr. Hart was gladly saying, here, there's one of the recommendations. Get your act together and look after these people.
We sometimes talk about the capacity of groups like Savia, Margaret, but I think what we really mean is energy levels. And you said you're having to do everything yourself. What's the impact on your energy level and on Savia's energy level and on the members' energy level at this stage into the process?
It's not good. I've had to get medication myself, you know, and I've actually moved away from Belfast, you know, just to get my head showered, as it were, and because I eat and sleep this, and I know there's many that are worried and concerned about me, you know. Yeah, but I cannot stop. I drive from where I am. I've moved to Ballycastle, you know, and it's because it's beside the sea and there's a bit of greenery and stuff, you know. And just to get away out of here, I couldn't cope any longer. I had been unwell, but you can't let people down. I feel as if I have this on my shoulders, and for everybody. And I've just met lovely groups from the Shankill and Silverstream and Ballysillen and Bangor, our cross community, you know, the people you've met from Kincora, you know, and you cannot let these people down, and I will not, you know, stop till we see something positive and constructive and meaningful for people. You know, they could have, as a gesture, we asked for an interim payment. They did it 2 years in down the south. They did it in Australia, and other governments looked after their people. You know, people want to reward their children because of the damage that we have given out towards our own children, not knowing what was wrong with us or admitting what was wrong with us.
I'm going to stop, Margaret, because I think this is getting, for this committee, perhaps too personal. But I'm very conscious you've said on a number of occasions you can't let people down. No. And I think as a generalisation, I mean this only as a generalisation, everybody has a responsibility to themselves as well, but I'm uncomfortable with where we are going here, so I'm going to pass over to Chris Haddon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I suppose until this time this isn't a particular issue that I've dealt with in any personal capacity myself. But I suppose it's inspiring in one way to hear what you're saying today, but also very depressing as well. And I suppose with that in mind, where is the blockage and what is the blockage? It is one thing that instantly hits what I want to ask. But also I suppose in dealing with, I suppose, investigations and redress in relation to maybe conflict-related legacy issues, Article 2 has been a big thing here in pushing stuff on. Is there an equivalent international pressure point that can be applied on government to make them actually act and maybe not stall it? Perhaps I don't want to put words in your mouth, it's stalling, but where is that pressure point if it does exist?
I mean, there are a number of international human rights conventions that are pertinent to this. Article 3 of the European Convention in terms of torture, cruel and human degrading treatment is one obvious one on both clerical abuse and Magdalene laundry, mother and baby homes. But there are a number of other conventions. it's the degree to which that's enforceable in terms of delivering sufficient pressure on government. As I've identified, there have been a number of UN reports that we did bring to the attention of OFMDFM back in summer of 2013, specifically calling for these inquiries, and yet I think that the frustration that Margaret has identified among the broader victims community is that there's endless process, but precious little in terms of product. There was, great welcome for the HIA inquiry when it was established, and there's still strong support for the work that it is doing under Sir Anthony Hart, but it's the victims that got left behind, if you like, the frustration, and they would be regularly in contact with me for updates, and it's sort of very sad phone calls I have to make in response to say, nothing further from the last time, and indeed we're now really a number of years on. So there are international human rights conventions that are pertinent to this, but ultimately it is not sufficiently binding on government at this stage. I mean, and victims don't necessarily want to go down the road of pursuing court cases through the domestic courts and all the way to Strasbourg to try and enforce their right, and have tried to engage at a political level with ministers.
And can I just say, many have went in front of the courts, and even though the orders and whatever have apologised, they're putting them through the abuse all over again and bringing up their past or putting in the statute of limitations. So they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, and they don't know where to turn to.
And in terms of the options, we're in a position where there was a scoping, and then there was a scoping of the scoping, and the result seems to be further consultation. Let's think about it a bit more. But how do you explain that, Margaret, to Savia members?
They're putting their trust in me. I know a whole lot of them are just fed up, and how often can you tell them these things? And all I can say to them, look, I'm not going to give up. You will have your day over my dead body, do you know? But a lot of them are so disillusioned and disappointed, and not many of them just want to become involved anymore. They're just languishing.
You see, they trust you, Margaret, and you're saying they're losing their trust in government, but isn't that the bottom line? Isn't that where we begin? If you're put into care and you are abused, the first thing that goes is trust.
Yes.
So it is
So they tried to trust all over again.
It's quite an ask for government to say trust me, when it was government's failure to prove trustworthy in the first place that was the problem.
And that's going to be the outcome of this inquiry.
I mean, Chris asked about where the blockage is. I mean, we don't know the internal workings of the department and if there are differences of opinion within it. But there seems to have been a view taken at some point that there would be no decisions taken on any further inquiries until the HIA inquiry is done and dusted and out of the way. Victims, and certainly Amnesty International, has never been able to understand the logic of that, given that the HIA inquiry specifically doesn't include these victims, these categories of victims. So therefore, it should not be dependent on that inquiry, what happens for other categories of victims. It seems to be an illogical approach to it, but that certainly is a rationale that has been put forward. So whether that's that politically you can only deal with one type of abuse at one time, it doesn't seem to make much sense, or whether it's a reluctance to commit the budget to it, that perhaps is another reason. We don't know. We haven't been given sort of coherent answers. Say what we've faced is constant process, scoping paper, second scoping paper, and now it would seem to have been decided for a Department of Health-led process to take over the 3 years of OFMDFM-led process.
And why have they not called in the church and the orders? They cannot say now that as another fudge, you know, that well, you can't preempt that, you know, it's a legal issue. They've already admitted it and apologised at the HIA inquiry. They've already put their hands up to it because there's so much evidence and they've already seen it. So that's a cop-out in itself. Okay. Why have they not brought the church and the orders into, you know, let's, between government and the church, set up some type of fund here as a gesture.
With members' permission, I think Chris Hazard has a follow-up on that.
Yeah, it was just a mention of budget. Is there any notional idea about how much we're talking about here? What would deal with it?
No, I think there was a budget allocation correct me if I'm wrong, somebody else knows the figures, I think originally of perhaps £12 million, or that was the budget allocation for the HIA inquiry. And that's obviously been quite an extensive process with officials and public hearings and investigators and the rest of it. So depending on the scope of any subsequent inquiry, we may be talking about similar amounts, we may be talking about less or more, it's impossible to say. And in terms of a redress process to follow, I think that's yet to be scoped out. And say the expert panel that Savia, all of the other victims groups, Amnesty and others are involved in, will be bringing forward recommendations for a model scheme come May or June. And then perhaps it'll be possible to cost what that might look like, but we're certainly not at that stage yet. So in terms of a HIA inquiry type cost, perhaps 12 million.
I think, Patrick, in fairness, it was very difficult for the department to put a figure on it without knowing the scale of the thing, and from memory it was agreed that it would be funded in the initial stages through monitoring.
That's right.
And it has since had its own budget line incorporated. Thanks, Edward.
Thank you very much. The First and Deputy First Minister are due to attend this committee next week, and I trust that all the questions will be answered better then, that are not being answered over such a long period of time. Can I just ask you, first of all, have you received, Salvia or Amnesty or both, have you received officially from FM and DFM any briefing or advice about what the outcome was of the recent executive meeting in terms of the options that were being considered on one hand and the options then were chosen on the other?
No, I mean, we know of I think there were 5 options. We know of them because of an answer that Junior Minister McCann gave back in June to the Assembly. One of which was for a statutory inquiry, which would have been the one we preferred, and one of which was for a Department of Health-led interdepartmental process, which is what we understand that they've been, but we haven't received any formal communication about that. I think there's been some maybe informal briefing has gone on for some of the victims, but there's nothing. I should say from Amnesty we have written to OFMDFM asking for that information, but we haven't received a substantive response yet.
No communication, you see, and that's not right either, you know.
The fact that we've known since 2012 of the deficit in the arrangements to look into these matters, to not be told once a decision has been made, whatever the character of the decision, it just seems to be now the way this thing is getting managed in that office. Could I then ask you a second and similar question? Patrick, you said that there's been no formal response to the submission that you gave to FM and DFM in March 2015. Do you mean that besides it being acknowledged, your correspondence, there's been nothing else since March 15 in response to the content of your submission?
There was a meeting that involved ministers from one side of the department, but it was inconclusive. It was appreciative of the submission that we had jointly put, but there was no conclusion to that, and we haven't heard of any conclusion since. Yes, events, meanwhile, have perhaps overtaken things, and that Sir Anthony has started his own work. Whether that is a result of our prompting and the expression of displeasure from victims that redress was also now being postponed, I don't know. But no, we haven't had any formal outcome or response to the submission that we made in March 2015.
And of course, we're now a year later, and as you indicated, Margaret, you have to do all the chasing, and here a year later you're still chasing a response in that regard, and to a lesser extent, because we're not the primary people here, the committee has been chasing as well for many a long month and year, and similarly not got much response. The third question, and I think I know the answer to this, but are you aware of any scoping going on in FMDFM in relation to what redress might look like, given that Sir Anthony Hart has said that he'll be bringing forward a recommendation in January next year for redress?
Short answer is no. So there was one of our recommendations was that as well as establishing an interim scheme to get us to the point where a longer term scheme would come in, that they would indeed start that exercise and have worked up proposals, have costed them, have begun negotiations with other contributors such as religious bodies, for instance, so that come January 2017 in Sir Anthony's report, that the ministers aren't looking at a blank page, that they actually have done a lot of the advance work, so that there would not be further delay then, because we know that political decision making can take significant time, so there's an opportunity to do that advance work. The voluntary group of the victims, Amnesty, University of Ulster and other academics, is now doing that work, and we will be making our findings fully known and recommendations known to OFMDFM after the elections. But we're not aware of the department doing that work themselves.
Do you have any knowledge that when the Government of Ireland was doing this work, how long it took them to develop a redress scheme, both interim and final schemes? Like, presumably it took them a number of years, if not.
2 years in, Alex, they sought to look after, especially the elderly and those mentally affected and badly affected. They stepped up to the mark and set up an interim redress scheme.
I don't know how long it was from when they decided that we need to establish such a scheme to final decisions being taken for its make-up and it coming into form. I can certainly check that out.
They're not more sympathetic.
But there was, again, an interim process there.
The danger, and I'll come back to this because I do have some proposals to make to the committee, the danger is that if there's no scoping being done now, and I don't think there is, then come January, that work starts then. The lead-in time here and the budget lines here are both problematic, and therefore create uncertainty in the short term on the basis of our experience heretofore is very challenging to put it mildly. I think, see the matters that I want to come back to, Chair. I think those are my questions.
Okay, Deputy Chair, Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick, Max, good to see you both. Thank you for your ongoing work in relation to this. Hopefully you've heard enough from the committee today and followed how we have endeavoured to prioritise these issues at the committee on your behalf and on the grounds of your leadership and your efforts in relation to this, to the point of where we were well down the line of invoking legislative powers to require information on these issues from the department. First and Deputy First Minister haven't attended our committee since June 2014, so it shows you the level of challenge that we have experienced as well as a committee to get the type of information that we believe you deserve. On that ground, people have gone into quite a bit of detail. Now, I don't want to take us into any more detail, but given that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, if I'm not wrong, are scheduled to attend the committee next week, are there a small number of key questions that you want to have answers to from the First and Deputy First Minister when they're here next week, that you could tell us what they are?
I can come in first of all. First of all, I guess it's about certainty. The frustration has been about endless process and no product yet, no product in terms of an inquiry for either category, and no product in terms of a redress scheme being on the table. So if indeed there has been a decision taken at the executive as of last month to have further interdepartmental process or consideration of inquiries to cover those categories of clerical abuse victims and Magdalene Laundry mother and baby home victims, then we would like to see some certainty in terms of timetables, and not just for that scoping exercise, that consultation exercise, but for decision making. So we have heard 6 months timeline attached to the mother and baby home Magdalene Laundry process. Don't know if that's the case or not, but if that's the case, then we'd like to have clarity about that within several months thereafter a decision will be taken, but as we would wish to see establishment of an inquiry, and the same would go for clerical abuse victims. So certainty about a decision-making timetable that victims can be aware of, so it's not endless process, there is an end in sight and something for the committee to perhaps scrutinise or come back to. As we understand it, is the Department of Health will be leading in that work, but will be making recommendations back to the executive. So it's something that will be back on the table, presumably off OFMDFM in due course. And equally, in terms of establishment of a redress process, we would like answers to the questions about a sort of a commitment to the establishment of a redress process, because Sir Anthony has certainly said that he will be recommending one, and for a commitment around making sure that it's included in the next programme for government, and indeed that there is a budget allocation for this. This is going to cost money. There's no shying away from that. It should cost money because people have suffered financial loss and will have financial needs, and other welfare needs will have price tags attached to them. So in terms of political decision-making led by OFM, DFM, DFP and others, there will have to be programme for government capacity, and there will need to be budget capacity, and that will create the foundations on which the positive decisions can be taken.
Yeah, I think Patrick has said everything there, and it's really about a commitment that we can get, and a meeting with the First and Deputy First Minister to say that they have set this up, they will set it up, and to tell us face to face and not through the civil servants or anyone else, that they will commit themselves as they promised all those years ago. They made that commitment and promise in front of the media, that they were committed to the end of this and a good outcome, and they looking after all of the victims and survivors. And then, they just disappear, and it's as if they haven't fulfilled their promises or committed themselves at all. We'd like to meet them, and with their commitment that they're going to set the budget here, which is going to cover the redress. And what we want them to commit to also is to bring in the church and the religious orders. Instead of me having to run to the church and have set up meetings with Bishop McKeown and Bishop Traynor and even Eamon Martin and everybody else, and then hand their phone numbers over to members of the government here, that they need to be seen to be doing it. And we want a commitment that they're doing it. We want that in the meeting, that they're going to look after the victims and survivors now, which they set out to do. They said that, and they promised they would do, but they've let us all down, it seems. Let's see if they can do something about this, and maybe can we ever have trust in our government again. It's very, very hard to have trust in anyone, and I appeal to our people, trust them, they'll look after us, but it seems to have fell through.
Max, when was the last time Savia met with First and Deputy First Minister?
Both of them together?
Or representatives of OFMDFM, ministerial, First Deputy First Minister, junior ministers?
Was that over a year ago or 2 years ago? And it's
all,
ago,
yeah.
And it's all that, yes, and we'll talk to this one and we'll do this. And
okay.
I think from an amnesty point of view, I think we met with them summer of last year around that. I can't remember the exact date. So there has been engagement there.
But you don't hear that.
It's the outcome is lacking, not the consultation, or they know what our views are. In fact, they've known them for 3 or 4 years on these matters. It's that.
I think communication does matter.
It's like it was in one ear and out the other.
Does matter.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and it's very sad to say that, but that's just the way it is.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here today and for setting out the issues that you need clear communication on. Hopefully, we as a committee will be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can certainly guarantee it will be a major agenda item with FM and DFM next week. Final point, possibly more for yourself, Margaret. In terms of redress, can we just be clear about why people want redress? Because some may want it because of their lost opportunities in education and in employment, which at this remove means also the inability to have contributed to pensions. Yep. And possibly also redress in terms of how it is impacting intergenerationally. Others might want redress in terms of punishment. I want the state to suffer because of what they did to me. Is it A, B, or a combination?
Well, at this stage, I would say it's monetary redress that people are wanting now.
For the lost opportunities?
For the lost opportunities and for the intergenerational damage that perhaps that we have meted out towards our children, not knowing about our own mental capacities and, you know, how we've been damaged. You know, a lot of people can, perhaps, you know, you don't know what goes on underneath the makeup and the, you know, in people's lives, and they do tend to hide a lot, still filled with shame and, you know, but they know they could have done a lot more for their children had they been raised in the right circumstances and environment. Do you know, a lot of people have just lost out. Unemployability is a big factor, do you know, because they didn't believe in themselves and full of shame and didn't think that they ever fitted in. And I can put my hand up to that.
I hope I speak for the committee in saying I really regret, to put it mildly, that in 2016 you have to sit there and talk to us in those personal terms, Margaret. Thank you very much, and Patrick, thank you. And we will be returning to this subject next Wednesday, DV, with First and Deputy First Ministers.
Okay, thanks, committee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next item, members, today is our second oral briefing.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry. She wanted to bring up some issues.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to these now, and I don't actually know if I'll propose now or wait till next week. But my own sense is that a day is too long to wait now in relation to a lot of the issues that people Margaret represents raise. But I think we should be saying to OFMDFM first, Salvia required to have a proper briefing officially on the record about what the outcome of the executive meeting was. You know, it seems that they have some sense of things one way or another, but they have not received any proper official formal briefing about an executive decision that was taken 2 or 3 weeks ago. And after the narrative of writing and getting no substantive replies that they and others have had, that seems to be the minimum courtesy and respect. Then the second, and touching upon the stuff that Patrick Corrigan raised, I think we should be asking FM and DFM in the preparations for the PFG that they are responsible for. Are they working to the basis that there will be a PFG commitment to a redress scheme, given that one is going to be proposed by Justice Hart, by Sir Justice Hart in January of next year? That secondly, a commitment to the work that the Executive has agreed shall be undertaken will be completed within 6 months. Because one stream of work has a 6 months commitment and the other stream of work doesn't have a 6 month commitment, but that work will be completed within 6 months. And I could go further than that, saying that decisions arising from that work should be completed within 2 months thereafter. And the fourth issue is an explanation about how it is that FM and DFM have responsibility for this, that they sponsor the legislation through the House in respect of the Hart inquiry, and now the authority of OFMDFM has been abdicated and given to health. An explanation about how their authority in dealing with these issues heretofore has now been seconded to health. And my own view is that the first 3 matters, the fourth I think can get explained some way or other next week. The first 3 matters should be put to FM and DFM now. And I think that is a sort of minimum response to this committee to the evidence that Margaret gave.
Members?
Great.
Yes. I think, in fairness, if FM and DFM were not scheduled by happenstance to be before us next Wednesday, we would be writing. So we should write. I think the principle is there. I see no disagreement. So we take the 3 points, the first 3 points that Alex has brought up. Are you content you have those?
That's the EFG commitment to redress.
Will there be
Work will be completed within 6 months,
Fine.
and then decisions 2
Within
months
3
thereafter.
months thereafter.
Yeah.
And that
That's the two work streams of DHS,
Yeah, both work
SPS
streams.
and safeguarding. Yeah.
and then Savia are properly briefed without delay.
And amnesty.
I think Savia
Yeah, but they tend to
Yes, I'll be clear about
work
it.
as a pair. And then the explanation as to why that's for next week. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So members, as I say, we have a second briefing. This is from officials on the childcare strategy. In your pack, the clerk's brief is at page 205. Correspondence of the 21st of May last to OFMDFM requesting further information is at 208. Departmental correspondence of the 15th of July regarding the proposed HMRC tax-free childcare scheme is at 209. And the briefing paper, 23rd Feb of this year, page 217. And we welcome Margaret Rose McNaughton, Head of Equality, Human Rights and Social Change Division, and Dr. Martin Tyrrell, another departmental official. Margaret Rose, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to update the committee on progress with the full childcare strategy. As the committee will be aware, we launched the consultation on the draft childcare strategy in July 2015 and it ran until November 2015. An online questionnaire was completed by 175 people and a further 125 groups and individuals submitted written responses, so there was a fair response to the consultation. Separate consultation events, of course, were also organised for children and parents. At the moment, we're analysing the consultation responses and we're holding a stakeholder event on the 16th of March, at which we want to share the emerging findings from our analysis of the responses and update stakeholders on the development of the final strategy. An interim evaluation of the school-age childcare grant scheme is due to begin shortly, and we want to use the findings of that along with the consultation responses and stakeholder views on emerging findings to help us finalise the strategy in the coming weeks. I'm going to hand over now to Martin, Chair, if you're content to talk you through the paper that was provided to committee members, which just really gives a summary of where things are regarding the key first actions and also provides the key themes emerging from the consultation on the final childcare strategy. Martin, can I pass over to you?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, you've got the paper, and I'll just run through some of the main points that are covered in that. As Margaret Rose said, we launched the childcare strategy on a phased basis. The first phase was published in September 2013, and that comprised 15 key first actions, which were intended to address the main priorities, the main childcare priorities that we'd identified during an earlier period of consultation and research in 2012. Those priorities, the key first actions rather, are listed in the annex to the paper, in Annex 1 to the paper. The first of those, the most pressing of the needs identified back in 2012 consultation and research, was the need for school-age childcare services for after-school clubs, breakfast clubs and summer schemes aimed at the 4 to 12 or 4 to 14 age group. 3 of the key first actions are concerned with school-age childcare. That's key first actions 1, 2 and 5, and responsibility for taking those forward falls to OFMDFM. They had very ambitious targets. They had a target to sustain or create between 5,000 and 7,000 school-age childcare places. And they're being taken forward through the School-Age Childcare Grant Scheme, which we launched in March 2014. The grant scheme has been taken forward on our behalf by our managing agent, the Childcare Partnerships, which are part of the Health and Social Care Board. Partnerships are responsible for promoting the scheme, for financially managing it, for working with prospective applicants, and for assessing all of the applications received. In addition to that, they provide ongoing support to successful applicants after they've been awarded their funding. First, we've had three calls to date, but 2 complete calls. The first of those 2 calls in 2014, they attracted 79 applicants who met the criteria. Around 40 applicants failed to meet the criteria. And those successful 79 applicants have been awarded £3 million over a 3-year period. Their projects aim to create or sustain 2,200 childcare places, mainly sustaining existing places. Around 1,500, 1,600 places will be sustained, and about 600, 700 new places created. All of the beneficiaries under those first 2 calls were existing childcare providers, and that had been something of a worry, particularly with the second call, that we were not attracting start-up childcare providers, new start childcare providers. We were only getting existing childcare providers. The success of this grant scheme depends on attracting new childcare providers into the childcare market, childcare entrepreneurs. So the third call was crucial in that respect, how the third call panned out. The third call completed at the end of January, and it attracted 54 applications, and 33 of those were from start-up childcare providers, 19 of which are based on the school estate. If all of those are successful, they will be awarded £2.3 million over a 3-year period. That's the amount that the 54 are seeking. And they aim between them to create 1,000 new childcare places. The assessment of those applications will begin next week. We should have the assessment process completed before the end of the month and the letters of offer issued at the start of April. We expect to carry further calls under the grant scheme once we've completed the interim evaluation that Margaret Rose referred to, and also this will be part of the full childcare strategy. The next call for applications is likely to be under the full final version of the childcare strategy. The interim evaluation is being carried out now because of the centrality of grant funding schemes to the full version of the childcare strategy. And we want to look at a number of key questions, particularly the feasibility of grant funding as a means of creating the envisaged number of childcare places, which is more than 20,000 childcare places, albeit over a 10-year period. I'll go quickly through the other key first actions. Key first action 3 is the Rural Childcare Initiative. That had initially set out to create 1,000 childminder places in rural areas, but as you'll know, DARD took a second look at that particular action, and they reported that affordability was more of an issue than availability, and they put forward a think piece that set out a number of proposals for taking forward rural childcare, and that think piece has largely been incorporated into the draft childcare strategy that was issued for consultation last year. Key first action 6 to 10 are being taken forward by Department of Health and Social Services and Public Safety. Key first action 6 is concerned with the childcare needs of children with a disability, and it has a number of components, including a small grant scheme that has to date awarded £60,000 to childcare providers to help those providers become better able to meet the childcare needs of children with a disability. A training initiative focusing on childcare providers, which has to date delivered training to 1,300 childcare providers, and a holiday grant scheme which provides childcare services for children with a disability during the school summer holiday. There's been 3 rounds of holiday grant scheme funding to date, and there will be a 4th round of funding later this year for the forthcoming summer. Key first actions 7 and 8 focus on information, providing information on childcare services to parents. That's comprised an upgrade to the Family Support Northern Ireland database, the childcare element of that, and also making that information readily available via a smartphone app. Key First Actions 9 and 10 focus on promoting awareness of childcare, promoting awareness of the benefits of registered childcare and the financial assistance available to parents with the cost of childcare. Department of Health has bid for the resources to take that one forward. To date, we don't know the outcome of that bid. Key First Actions 11 to 14, they focus on workforce development, which is a key element in promoting quality childcare. DEL are responsible for taking those actions forward, and DEL is currently working closely with the childcare partnerships via the Regional Childcare Workforce Group, which is looking at things like training needs within the childcare workforce and coordinating interventions to address those needs. Finally, Key First Action 15 is concerned with the governance of the strategy. There's a Childcare Strategy Programme Board, which comprises all departments with an interest in childcare policy and the childcare partnerships, and that meets regularly to monitor the performance of the strategy. The development of the full final childcare strategy, as Margaret Rose said, we had the consultation at the second half of last year, running from July through to November. And that attracted a significant amount of interest. That attracted 300 consultation responses, including 125 written responses, which extend to around 500 pages of very closely argued, detailed text, very constructive, critical response to the childcare strategy in draft, and 175 responses to our online questionnaire. We're currently in the process of analysing those consultation responses. The next steps really are to analyse fully all of the consultation responses that we've received, have that final workshop on the 16th of March for stakeholders, and take account of the emerging findings of the evaluation of the school-age childcare grant scheme. All of that will feed into the finalisation of the childcare strategy, which we hope to complete over the next 4 to 6 weeks. The draft childcare strategy you'll be aware of. The annex, the second annex to your paper, sets out the proposed interventions. We are aiming to create 44,000 childcare places over a 10-year period. We're aiming to promote quality of childcare services by developing the childcare workforce, and we're aiming to achieve better joined-up childcare services through the Childcare Strategy Programme Board and also through the stakeholder panel by bringing stakeholders directly into the governance and scrutiny of the strategy over its 10-year period. What we've been getting back from stakeholders to date and from commentators through the consultation process, I'll just summarise briefly some of the main themes that have been coming through in the consultation process. First, people have been generally supportive of the aims of the strategy. The aims are child development, using childcare services to promote child development, and using childcare services to promote and facilitate parental employment, enabling parents to join the workforce. The developmental aim has been particularly welcomed, and people are particularly content with the positioning of those two aims, with child development first and parental employment second. People did say to us, though, that child development isn't simply academic performance, isn't simply school readiness or school performance. It also needs to take account of so-called soft skills, children's self-esteem, self-confidence, linguistic development. Those kind of aspects as well, those are part of the development process. And also, people have said to us that development is for all children. It's not just for the children of working parents, that if we are taking child development as a good thing in itself, as something worth promoting, then we should be promoting that across the board for all children. Generally, the objectives of the draft strategy have been welcomed, although there was some caution regarding the sustainability objective. We're aiming to have affordable childcare services and also childcare services that are sustainable in that they can recover their costs through their fee income. Many people highlighted the mismatch or potential mismatch between those two objectives. A major area of criticism was the speculative nature of the interventions, that to date interventions haven't been fully worked through. They're speculative, they include words like we will look at, we will consider, rather than we will actually do, and that's something we will firm up as we move forward to finalise the strategy. The proposal to have low-cost, no-cost childcare services for particularly disadvantaged children, that was particularly welcomed. The idea of a stakeholder panel as part of the governance of the childcare strategy was welcomed, and many people emphasised don't overlook preschool children. This focus on school-age childcare was maybe appropriate for the first phase, but the final childcare strategy needs to take account of all age groups, including preschool. I'll say a little bit just about affordability. We're promoting assistance, financial assistance with the cost of childcare. We're also supporting low-cost childcare services, social economy providers, and we're requiring anyone who receives assistance under the grant scheme to promote the financial assistance among the parents who are benefiting from those services. The arguments on tax-free childcare are fairly well rehearsed. Tax-free childcare will be available from 2017. We believe that all evidence indicates that tax-free childcare is superior to vouchers in terms of the overall benefit to this region. And the NISRA research that we have had carried out, which I believe you have received, that confirms what we had thought about tax-free childcare. NISRA found that 67% of families would be better off under tax-free childcare, 15% would be better off under vouchers, and the remaining 18% would not be eligible for either of those two schemes. That's essentially what's in the paper.
Did you say that the strategy will be ready in 4 to 6 weeks?
We will be drafting the strategy, and we would hope to complete the process of drafting within 4 to 6 weeks.
So it will be one for the next executive to sign off?
It's very likely that it would be. I think PERTA starts 29th of March.
Which would be about 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we will be obviously continuing
Yes.
the drafting of it throughout that period.
There would be no intention to try and have it signed off during PERTA, would there?
Well, I think it would be very difficult. I mean, I think another department will be taking over this area of work.
Yes, and I'd like to ask you about that in a second. Just one other thing you said, Martin, which was the importance in your assessment of childcare entrepreneurs to the success of the scheme. How are you defining an entrepreneur? Because I'm seeing that the Oxford definition is a person who sets up a business taking on financial risks in the hope of profit. Is that your definition?
I think I used the word social entrepreneur, and if I didn't, that's what we are trying to capture with this.
I think you said childcare entrepreneur, but...
Well,
That's what you meant.
that is what I meant indeed.
Well, I think it's very important you clarify.
Entrepreneurship in its most general sense, someone who undertakes to do something, someone who undertakes to bring about a project. That's what we're keen to attract. And what we have been concerned about is if there are enough people out there with the skills and determination to take forward a childcare project from start to finish and deliver childcare places.
Let's write it into the record that you were talking about a childcare social entrepreneur.
Yes. At the minute, within the grant scheme as it's currently configured, the school-age childcare grant scheme focuses on social economy providers and therefore on social economy entrepreneurs.
Does it still provide for private sector funders setting up a social economy arm?
Yes. Oh, yes. And several have done so.
Thank you. Margaret Rose, under the transfer of functions, as you have suggested, this all moves to the Department of Education. What impact do you think that's going to have?
On the progress with the strategy? Well, to be honest, the people who are currently involved in developing this strategy will also move to Department of Education. So clearly, I can see that there will be certainly consistency of approach once they arrive in the new department. The Department of Education clearly recognises that it will have further responsibilities in relation to children. I think there's real opportunity there as well to, when you look at the early years that education currently it looks after, and then obviously the pre-education schemes as well. I think childcare fits quite.
So it's a situation, and I'm not being critical, I'm just asking for clarification, that the next Minister for Education will be told, here is a policy that we have completed, here are the staff who are going to implement it, and it's in your department now.
no, I think any new minister for education will want to have some input into the strategy as well. We will develop it as far as we can between now and 9th of May when the transfer of functions order kicks in. But I think it would be absolutely for another new minister then to...
Well, what if the new minister says, I don't like this?
We will obviously have to take on board what any new minister would say, and we'd need to go back and look at the particular areas that they're not content with.
I should say that...
Are you transferring, Martin?
Yes. So.
And Margaret Rose?
Not at this stage, as far as I'm aware.
Sorry, Martin, you wanted to...
The Department of Education is currently represented on the School Age Childcare Programme Board. So none of the content of the final version of the childcare strategy should come as any surprise to that department or its officials. The department has been institutionally involved in the development of the strategy. It has commented on all of the drafts, commented critically, suggested changes to the text. So it should be familiar territory to the Department of Education.
Will you lead the board when this is all complete?
An official from the Department of Education will lead whatever management structure is put in place to take forward the full version of the childcare strategy.
Okay, I think we might wish to go through some of the actions, but can I say you were outlining 15 key first actions, but you've now turned that to an extent into 22 interventions.
Yeah. Proposed interventions.
Proposed, yeah.
Why not stick with the 15?
Well, most of the 15, I think, are in the 22, and there's been some additional proposals as well. So it's like 15 plus 7 additional proposals. But my memory of this is that all of the 15 are captured within the 22. And then we've added, for example, we've added proposals for private sector, assisting private sector childcare providers, and for public sector franchises. There's been some novel proposals, but also some of the existing proposals. I said, in fact, I believe all 15 are still there.
Okay. Final question from me from the moment. How many social entrepreneurs have you got, and how many were you targeting?
We had aimed to create or sustain 5,000 to 7,000 childcare places. Can't remember. So I'm trying to do mental arithmetic here, and I cannot, off the top of my head, say how many entrepreneurs that would involve, how many childcare settings would be required to deliver that number of childcare places. Let's say it's 300. We were hoping to attract 300 applicants into the grant scheme, of whom the majority we had hoped would be start-up childcare providers. To date, we have 79 existing providers and potentially another 54 childcare providers coming in through the third call, 33 of whom are start-ups. So we've only achieved 33 start-ups to date.
Because there are, as you know, there are two elements to this. It is affordable childcare, which you have some control over because you have the budget, but it is also accessible childcare, and that's where you need people to come to you.
Absolutely.
So how are you doing on the accessibility piece?
At the minute, well, the grant funding is promoted extensively in all areas. There's promotional events. People who express an interest in applying are mentored and guided through the application process. We have around 50 people who expressed an interest who have not yet progressed to full application stage. Okay. We're working with prospective applicants.
Are there geographic black spots?
At the minute, the first that stands out is the area covered by the South East Health and Social Care Trust. That has been conspicuously underperforming in terms of applications and therefore successful applications. The others have been similar in terms of their performance, but that one area stands out.
Is there anything you can do to address that?
At the minute, the way the grant scheme is organised, all we can do is promote. It's possible that as the grant scheme is adapted in the light of the evaluation, which will look closely at the geographical spread of applications and successful applications, that we can start to pinpoint and go in and work much more closely in terms of building up capacity, for example, to build capacity among prospective applicants.
And the South East Trust would include the constituency of Strangford?
I think it does.
Oh, it does. Megan.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I suppose it's just to get into this issue of what is a social economy, and I think that, you know, in particular the school age childcare, that particular grant scheme, I think it's to be applauded that social economy models are being used and they're admirable. But if you're being realistic, in a lot of rural areas in particular, what is quite prevalent when it comes to childcare, family-run organisations, and it's interesting that you said earlier that private enterprises with a social economy arm would still be eligible for that, but within the criteria for the Bright Start, the applications that closed there at the end of January, social economy models, well, had to reinvest all their profits, and that's a brilliant thing, but also had to either become a charitable company or a community interest company. And from my understanding, that means that they would have had to, whatever land they own or whatever property they use for the service, they would have had to have handed that over to a board that then they could have no part in. Basically, they're handing over control of their organisation and the reputation that they've built and their services, and being able to have absolutely no control over the direction of it.
My understanding is that a social economy cannot own property, can't have individual property. That's my understanding of it. In order to qualify as a social economy provider, the assets must be held by a board, as you say. So that would exclude some providers who are not willing to pool assets in line with the requirements for social economy providers.
But then in terms of that board, would it not be more flexible to allow somebody who has set up this organisation and provided services for years to allow them to sit on the board? And I know that there's things that are around, they shouldn't be able to financially profit from it, but profits are being invested back in to the services being provided, and it is just something that a lot of people are reluctant to do, and I'm hearing it locally just because rurally childcare is scarce and accessibility is a major problem, and where there are organisations that are worried about applying for this or applying thinking that they're not going to be qualified for it because they don't want to basically hand over total control of their organisation.
I would hope that that's one issue, that the evaluation, while it's going to be a short kind of interim evaluation at this stage, I would hope the evaluation will tell us some of those things, so that as well as what you're telling us today, but so that in developing any grant scheme that would go forward as part of the full childcare strategy, that we have to start and look at other ways actually of doing this, and indeed obviously the private people who have currently have private facilities will not want to hand over the land or the property that they currently have, but are there other ways then that we can actually help some of those private providers, particularly in rural areas? And then two of the interventions, as you know, in rural areas are around childminder hubs and looking at different ways just to try and make childcare a bit more accessible in that in the rural areas particularly. Although I have to say I think some of the rural areas have been quite proactive in terms of the seeking the grants. There's a couple of the constituencies I think have been are probably have higher applications, higher number of successful applications than some of the more urban ones.
And indicate good targeting as well.
Well, it's just, I know it's just the third round, but in previous rounds in 2014, companies or not companies, that's the wrong word, but childcare organisations would have gotten a social economy certificate to certify them basically in that area. And now, whenever this new round came out, it was a bit of a shock. So I do think it needs to be looked at in terms of flexibility and accessibility overall in rural areas, because the reality is that is what people are dependent on.
Absolutely. No, we wouldn't want to exclude anyone who's got a good proposal for delivering childcare, and there's a little more flexibility in the proposals in the full childcare strategy. For example, we've got a supporting private sector childcare providers grant proposal in there, so there's ways that we can be more flexible on this.
And just in terms of, you said earlier that you needed to encourage more startups, and it's good to see that a lot more people have come forward this time, but were startups then given priority when being awarded applications or being awarded grants?
No, we take all comers.
Okay, and how long do you think that process will take then when applications are starting to be reviewed next week?
We hope to have that finished by the end of the month. Like really there's a few weeks where there'll be sessions of assessment, and then the letters of offer we'd hope can go out at the start of April.
Okay, thank you.
Didn't the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development identify affordability in rural areas as more of an issue than accessibility?
Yes.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your update, folks. Bright Start. So was Bright Start the childcare strategy then?
No.
The first phase, what was launched in September 2013, is the first phase of the childcare strategy, and what's coming is the full version of the strategy.
Okay. It's pretty confusing, to be honest. Bright Start has the Northern Ireland Executive's programme for affordable and integrated childcare written on the front cover. Underneath that it has strategic framework and key actions. And then on the next page it has the Northern Ireland Executive's strategy for affordable and integrated childcare, followed by a strategic framework and key first actions. So Bright Start was pretty confusing in terms of what it actually was, which I imagine makes it hard for people to engage with. It makes it hard to, in a time-bound way, assess what it was and what it was meant to do in that time period. But looking at the strategic online tool for monitoring progress of the PFG, another really accessible term, it says that by March 2015, if I'm being fair, at the latest, that the target was to publish and implement a childcare strategy with key actions and achieved in full expenditure. So how did the department do in terms of that target?
Well, clearly it's taken longer to develop and deliver the full childcare strategy. We did develop the first 15 key actions. We did access, I think, we did spend 3.4 million, I think was the figure, across those 15 key actions. The current strategy, the final strategy has been developed on a co-design basis. That has involved one-to-one meetings with stakeholders. We have, I think, been trying to just develop a more overarching strategy that will cover all of the areas that weren't included in the first 15 key actions. We had originally aimed for an early publication date, but I think with the co-design work and with the development now of a more outcomes-based approach, we think that the strategy will benefit from that and will benefit from that extra effort and time that's been put into it.
Let's call Bright Start the key first actions then, to try and keep it of some reference. You touched on it, but I didn't totally follow. The Bright Start key first actions targets, as far as I could see, was 3,000 school-age childcare places, 3,000 wraparound school childcare places, and 2,000 rural places. That was published or initiated in September 13. So in March 2016, 2.5 years on, where are we on those three targets in terms of places?
The majority of the places that have been sustained, so it's about 1,600, 1,700 sustained childcare places. Those are in disadvantaged areas, so those would fall under the first of those three that you've mentioned. The first batch of 3,000, I think, was to create or sustain 3,000 childcare places serving disadvantaged communities.
25% most deprived areas, yeah. Okay, so 1,600 out of 3,000?
Yeah, and the other 600 or 700, the new places that have been created, those are also predominantly benefiting disadvantaged communities. What complicates that is that some of those are based in schools, some of them are serving disadvantaged rural communities, but we would say that those are under the first of those three targets.
Okay, and what about 3,000 wraparound school childcare places and 2,000 rural places?
The school-based childcare, those are all new places, and we have created none of those to date. We're hopeful that the 19 New Start childcare providers based in the school estate who have come through on the third call will begin to deliver some of those places.
Okay, and 2,000 rural places?
Again, some of the people who've applied under the third call are New Start childcare providers, and we would hope that they would begin to create some of those childcare places.
So none as of yet?
None as of yet.
Okay.
Correct.
So what's that, 2,200 out of 8,000 targeted?
7,000, I think, is the maximum level, the maximum number of places that are targeted, and then there's 1,000 childminder places, which are separate from the grant scheme. So there's 7,000 places, maximum 5,000 to 7,000 places, and we've created or sustained to date 2,200.
And how do you...
A further 1,000 perhaps coming on.
In fairness to you, in fairness to all of us, it's quite hard to assess whether that's a good or bad performance, because there's no, I don't think there's any time scale attached to those key first actions. We do know that they were initiated in September 13, so 2.5 years on. How do you think, what's your assessment of 2,200 created out of a target of 7,000?
Out of a target of 5,000, maximum 7,000. I think that it's a good achievement to have sustained 1,600, 1,700 childcare places targeting disadvantaged communities that would have been lost but for our intervention. The counterfactual of our intervention is that those places would have been lost, and creating 600 childcare places where none previously existed. And whilst that isn't 5,000 childcare places, it's certainly a substantial achievement. A grant scheme is only ever as good as the applications it receives. And if we have had a shortcoming here on this, we have underestimated the time it takes for people with childcare projects to develop those projects to a stage where they can apply successfully to our grant scheme.
Okay, but as of March 2016, a year after the end of the programme for government, which set the target of, let's see, publish an implementation of a childcare strategy with key actions and full expenditure, we have 2,200 places on a key first actions document.
That's correct.
And you think that's a significant achievement?
I think that's a significant achievement to sustain childcare places serving disadvantaged communities, sustaining affordable childcare places serving disadvantaged communities that would have been lost but for the intervention, and creating childcare places that would not have existed but for the intervention. I think that that is an achievement.
I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't question that, to be honest.
I think
knowing the scale of challenge that is faced by families to access childcare, I think that's a concerning end of mandate.
Like I say, the grant scheme is only as good as the people who apply to it, as the applications that are received, and I think that we underestimated the time it takes entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, to generate applications that can meet the selection.
Why would that be? Why did you underestimate the time it took? Why did you not understand?
A lack of prior experience with a grant scheme of this type. I don't believe there's been an initiative of this type in this region in the past which is aimed to create and support prospective childcare providers.
But your department's responsible for doing that, so saying that it hasn't been done before is not exactly a great defence.
I think we perhaps have, also underestimated the time it took to get the grant scheme up and running initially. Because you're right, the key first action document issued in September 2013, and the first call, or the actual grant scheme then didn't launch until, was it March 2014, so it was about 6 months afterwards. And that whole process took much longer than we had hoped for, but that was getting the business case right and making sure that we had a robust scheme that we could actually stand over. And that was probably where we were over ambitious as well, in fairness.
Okay, well, you're obviously well behind schedule, but there is a significant amount being done in terms of the childcare strategy. Can you see that it's quite difficult for anyone, never mind an MLA or a statutory committee, to actually benchmark what milestones are meant to be being achieved and when? And I think it's important that is improved significantly as a matter of urgency.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think our evaluation will also help to identify just how well we have performed and where we have fallen down in some areas.
What is the new target for publication and implementation of a childcare strategy?
Well, at this point in time, I wouldn't want to give a date for the publication of the strategy. I mean, clearly there will be a new Minister in Education who will want to take it forward through due process through the executive and forever.
Not wrong, the budget for 11-15 was 12 million. What will the budget for the new childcare strategy, presuming it is soon to be published, what will the budget allocated for that be?
Well, again, I couldn't tell you what the budget for the full strategy will be at this stage, but I can tell you that, you know, we have secured up to 18-19, 3 million each year for, initially it was the key first actions and also to take forward other elements of the childcare, just the general childcare. But again, until we have the final strategy agreed, you know, with a very clear idea of what it is we are going to take forward and you know, what a grant scheme might look like within that, and each of the interventions fully costed, that's at the point then that we, you know, will need to be obviously bidding for the additional resources that would be required.
People have said that we need £50 million for childcare, so that sounds way off.
It's an incredible
the necessary budget. What's your view on that?
I mean, if you were to, I suppose, apply a figure across the interventions at the moment, we estimated something around, you know, I mean, a colossal amount, like £85 million or something, which we know is not. I mean, that's not
over 5 years.
Over 10 years.
That would be over 10 years
10
for
years.
the expanded version of the grant scheme that is proposed in the draft childcare strategy.
And do you think that will be achieved?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to be realistic about the budgets and we have to be realistic about the other priorities. If it was the will of the executive, of course, that childcare was the top priority, I mean, that's something for the executive.
That'd be one of my priorities. The Women Centre Childcare Fund was with DSD, I think was £880,000 per year. Small amount of money in terms of what is needed in childcare, but it helps sustain childcare provision for disadvantaged areas across 14 women's centre, I understand. My understanding is it has been extended for 16-17. Do you know what amount was extended for 16-17? I'm not sure if I genuinely myself, this is not a trick question.
I
don't
think
know
it's
what
a
it is.
similar amount
Right.
for the forthcoming.
And is there, will that provision be quickly incorporated into the childcare strategy in order to avoid the same difficulties those centres faced towards the end of this financial year, next financial year?
Our aim is to work with our colleagues at DSD to make sure that there is no gap period between the opening of new opportunities under the childcare strategy and the closure of the Women's Centre Childcare Fund. We want the final childcare strategy to provide an alternative source of funding for the current beneficiaries of the Women's Centre Fund, and we want there to be no gap period between those two.
Will it be, I know there's some significant concerns about changing the format of the way in which the funding is received and what it can be used for. Is there work ongoing to ensure that the opportunities the current format creates are not limited by any change of format?
Absolutely. I think we took the point in the consultation process that the current grant scheme, which offers a maximum of 25% of running costs as a grant to successful applicants, people told us that is no replacement for the Women's Centre Fund, which offers a much higher level of funding in view of the fact that the Women's Centre Fund is benefiting very disadvantaged communities. So one of the things we've been proposing is that childcare services are provided at low cost or no cost for a certain proportion of children, and that's been of interest to the current beneficiaries of the Women's Childcare Fund as a prospective alternative to the funding.
Final question, Chair, appreciate your indulgence. You mentioned private sector provision. You mentioned finding new ways to support private sector provision. Could you say a bit more about that? And in doing so, could you cover concerns in the private sector providers about impact of increase in living wage?
On the first, what we have in the draft childcare strategy is a grant scheme that would be available to private sector providers possibly for start-up, but also to existing providers who wish to expand the services that they're offering or to improve the quality of the services that they're offering, say by training, promoting training within their workforce, that type of initiative. We're aware of the contextual factors, that there's likely to be an increased demand for childcare services due to welfare reform, and at the same time that the costs of those childcare services are likely to increase. That's something that we'll continue to discuss with childcare stakeholders, both at our event on the 16th of March and as we go forward with the childcare stakeholders panel, which will be an integral part of the management of the childcare strategy.
What's the event on the 16th of March?
This is a stakeholder event. This is a further stakeholder workshop following on from the 2 workshops in 2014. This is an opportunity to present to stakeholders the main findings coming out of consultation. Ideally as well, the findings coming out of the evaluation, if there's any preliminary findings there, and an opportunity for stakeholders to discuss and put forward suggestions for the final content.
Where is it? What time is it at, and who can attend?
It's at 10 o'clock, I think, on the 16th of March in Crumlin Road Jail.
And can any provider attend?
Any provider who wishes to come along, any stakeholder who's got an interest in childcare can come along to that event.
How have you advertised it, and how do you advertise all of the opportunities available in general?
We have a pool of stakeholders that have been to the previous events, and then we had a list of people who submitted written input to the consultation or who attended our consultation events. So that was our invite pool for it, but we're happy for people to bring along others who were not formally invited, as long as they make themselves known to us before the event.
Final question.
Come along.
The proposal for 30 hours free childcare in GB, how will that impact Northern Ireland?
At the minute, we're looking at that. We're recognising it, but at the end of the day, we're developing our own childcare strategy, which is a local reaction to local circumstances. We would hope to provide childcare services that meet the needs of people here.
What's the current comparator in Northern Ireland to GB in that regard?
The nearest thing we have is that 15 hours, around 15 hours of preschool education are provided on the same basis that they're provided in England and Wales, 15 hours of preschool education. The current proposal from the coalition, not the coalition government, the Westminster government, is to introduce 15 hours of childcare. So they're marrying up 15 hours of preschool education with 15 hours of free childcare. We're looking at similar options here. We're certainly considering, for example, the low-cost, no-cost childcare proposal that's in the draft strategy.
So we're 15 hours worse off free childcare compared to the proposals in GB?
At the minute, we have a different situation here, but when the childcare strategy is introduced, our aim in the childcare strategy is to address local childcare.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. The Vice Chair alluded to the fact that you had a budget line for financial years 2011 to 15 of £12 million. How much did you spend as of 31st of March 2015?
4.2 million, wasn't it?
4.2
million, I think, was the figure up to March 2015. Again, principally on the Bright Start School Age grant scheme, but also on other projects supporting childcare, particularly for children with a disability.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex Albert.
Thank you. I have found all the information and briefing very useful. Could I just first of all agree with Megan's points in relation to childcare strategy and how it works through in the life of private businesses. There are private businesses out there who are very much motivated by the profit, but there are a vast number of private suppliers of childcare who have a profit in their business, but whose monies is invested in the business and invested in staff and in training and facilities for the children. And whilst any organisation that's profiteering as opposed to seeking profit by running a tight business, they shouldn't be treated any less equally than any other organisation. And not you, I may add, but there was an attitude from one or two people in OFMDFM that was, to borrow a phrase from the Shawshank Redemption, quite obtuse when it came to the issue of this impact upon, or this the ability of the private sector to access childcare money. And I hope that that attitude is beginning to change, and this obtuse approach doesn't prevail. The second question is, if the full 10-year delivery of childcare is 85 million, and the budget line for the 3 years up to 18-19 is 3 million, do I conclude from that as the budget lines currently are shaped, subject to any future decisions, that a third of the childcare strategy is going to be delivered as a consequence?
Can I just say, first of all, that 85 million is just very much an estimated figure. I mean, that was just a very rough
What's your
analysis.
figure?
Yes, it was our estimate.
That's your figure.
It's our estimate of what the grant scheme, as proposed in the draft
On the
childcare
basis of £3
strategy,
million
would cost.
per year for 3 years, and 30 million is extrapolated from that for 10 years, are we saying to the childcare world and to parents looking for childcare that we are now recalibrating the childcare strategy to be a third of what is needed?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think it's too early for us really to say, and I suppose maybe the 85 million was an unfortunate figure to come out with now, because I wouldn't want people to think that 85 million is the cost of the new strategy. These are they're
And you shouldn't have said that.
Well, it's only in the record.
But I mean, it is really just very rough costings on our behalf at this stage.
Let's work on the basis of rough costings. Let's say it is 70 million. Let's come down. rather
Okay,
than go
well,
up.
I mean,
On the basis of it being 70 million, on the first 3 years of the childcare costs up to 18-19, it's 9 million.
yeah.
And therefore, over the 10 years, it'll be 30. Are we saying on the basis of 70 that over half of what is required in terms of childcare provision is not going to be provided because the budget line is not going to be there?
No. If there is a grant scheme as
We need to find the
it's
money.
set out in the draft childcare strategy, and if our estimate of 85 million as the cost of that proposed grant scheme is accurate, then we will have to find the balance of between the amount that is currently there and the amount we need to deliver that grant scheme if it survives the proposal stage into the final version of the strategy. That 85 million is an extrapolation of what the current grant scheme costs if it were to be expanded to deliver the envisaged number of places, which I think is 21,500 off the top of my head.
Well, based upon what Margaret Ann said earlier about challenge of finding money, and given that the money that's been found for up to 18-19 is £3 million a year, I don't think it's an unfair question to say, is that really the level of our ambition over the next 10 years and in those circumstances?
No, it's not.
The resource that's currently available is there to resource the first phase of the childcare strategy and its key first actions, primarily the school-age childcare grant scheme. The budget for the full final childcare strategy still has to be discussed, agreed, debated, bid for. That will be a separate issue.
Can I ask you a second question then? In relation to the schemes that were funded under the first phase of rollout, how many of the successful applicants were entirely new social enterprise models?
None. They were all existing providers. All 79 who have received funding to date are existing providers. The third call has attracted New Start childcare providers.
So the first and second phases were all existing providers?
Well, now, the first call, we had no expectation of getting any New Start providers. The first call was launched with a very short deadline and was aimed at existing providers, in particular a group of existing providers who were currently funded under a scheme that was about to close, an earlier school-age childcare support scheme that
Is the
dated
Malin
back to
Trimble
Peace
scheme?
This dated back to the Peace 2 programme, back to the 1990s, the end of the 1990s.
Certainly was taken forward by Malin and Hume, or by Malin and Trimble. So what we really did was, with the new rollout, was continued funding of the old scheme.
No, we required each of the beneficiaries who wished to reapply, well, they had to reapply, they had to satisfy the new criteria. We got some people that had been in the old scheme. We got some people who were existing providers but hadn't been in the old scheme. We got some people that wanted to sustain their number of places and some who wanted to create new places. So it wasn't simply a replication of the earlier Peace 2 scheme that had...
So how many of the 2,200 places receive funding under the old scheme?
I don't know off the top of my head. I couldn't say. I don't know how many. 79 were.
Only then can we know what was actually new,
Yeah.
or was just continuation of funding of a scheme that already had existed.
Well, we did explicitly set out to safeguard childcare places. Safeguard childcare places serving disadvantaged communities. That is a clear objective.
Interesting to have that figure. In terms of Chris's comment on Barnett consequentials from this unravelling commitment by Cameron to 30 hours for the 2 and 3 year olds, does your budget line take into account any of that Barnett consequential?
No, it's purely there to fund the key first actions, so it predates the 30 hours childcare initiative. The Barnett consequentials will be fairly separate from it.
And is there any indication from Treasury what and when the Barnett consequential will flow?
I'm not aware of any indication from Treasury about when those will be. Roughly, we would estimate the Barnett consequential from the 30 hours childcare scheme as being, I think, 11 million in the first year of the scheme, when I think it's been piloted in a number of areas rather than rolled out across all the hills. Then, by its final, when it's fully up and running, about 20 million a year after that.
I think that London is backpedaling on it anyway, and we'll probably maybe hear next week when the next phase of austerity is launched and imposed how vulnerable that 30 hours really is. But you're saying it's 30 million is the Barnett consequential? 20 over
10 in the first, I think 10, 11 in the first year of the scheme, and then about 20 million when the scheme has its full envisaged budget, which I think was set at 670 million a year as its kind of perpetual budget once it's fully up and running. Now, those are rough estimates by me. They're not formal estimates. Those are back of what the likely Barnett consequential from.
That could mean a surge in the delivery of the childcare strategy.
If you can spend it.
20 million added to the budget for childcare would be a great help to delivering childcare services. However, yes.
To Chris's point, could you deliver 30 hours a week if there was that amount available? 30 hours a week for a 2 and 3 year old, given your knowledge of the childcare sector in the north, unless you relied upon the private sector to do it?
The private sector isn't excluded from the full final version of the draft version of the childcare strategy. There's discussion about grant aiding. There's also discussion about assisting employers to purchase vacant primarily private sector childcare places. And there's talk about buying childcare services to offer on a low-cost, no-cost basis. So there's a number of proposals there that are equally attractive to social economy and private sector providers, and there's one proposal for grant aiding private sector providers that is exclusive to the private sector.
If there is any Barnett consequentials, and I think they're going to be less than we might have anticipated, and given that they're going to be for certain budget years, I would think a very urgent piece of work is required very quickly to find how you're going to spend that money without discovering that you can't spend it at all because you haven't got, there's not the ability to deliver those places. And my sense is that that bit of work is going to become quite urgent if Barnett consequentials follow in respect of whatever the commitment may end up being in terms of 2- and 3-year-olds.
I think there is, you know, there are opportunities to look across, you know, what is currently happening even in the pre-education schemes, you know, and how quickly that could be expanded if, you know, if need be. I mean, if we had the money, I think we would certainly be trying to ensure that we had robust schemes that we could get out quite quickly.
I suppose the piece of work that has been undertaken to ensure that we can expend any resource that is available for childcare is the finalisation of the childcare strategy.
Thank you.
If there were Barnett consequentials, are you aware of any discussions about whether they would be ring-fenced for childcare?
Not aware of any
Not
discussions.
aware of any discussions even on the Barnett consequences of the Westminster Bill.
Yeah.
Okay. Members, all done? Content? So Margaret Rose, thank you very much.
Thank
As
you.
ever. Now, members, we had been scheduled to receive a written update on the sexual orientation strategy today, but you can see this correspondence on page 230 of your pack. It advises us the project team have been asked to finalise a document for referral to ministers for agreement, with the aim of holding a further 12-week period of public consultation beginning this month. So there will be no discussion today by us.
Or strategy, this mandate, no, obviously.
No.
Yep.
Which leaves us, members, with
Very long grass.
leaves us with our draft legacy report of our own. And that has been prepared, and it begins at page 233 of your pack. Now this, of course, is primarily retrospective and reflective of the work that we have carried out over the mandate, but it also has a short commentary on issues that we may wish to recommend to the incoming committee of the Executive Office. It's still in draft form, but you'll see the following matters have been included in terms of achievements, so I would welcome comments as we go through, so please do shout. In terms of achievements, committee bills, we have, of course, NIPSO, the Public Service Ombudsman's Bill. We also have the Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints Amendment Bill. Inquiries, the two main ones, TBUC, Together Building a United Community, and we also looked at the Barroso Task Force. In terms of legislation, there was the inquiry into the Historical Institutional Abuse Bill, and I do think we recommended some major changes to that legislation. And the Children's Services Cooperation Bill, we took the committee stage, as you know. Policy scrutiny, victims and survivors, again, I think there was some very good work which led to a real focus, not least in terms of the Victims and Survivors Service. Also on policy, the Programme for Government, Delivering Social Change, and European issues. In terms of LCMs, we had the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill, the Childcare Payments Bill, the Intellectual Property Bill, and once again, the peak of our achievement, the Antarctic Bill, where we saved the Antarctic from legislative
That was last week's
ruin.
Last week's joke.
It was last week's joke, Alex. I am milking it for all it's worth. Members, any comments beyond, can the chair get a new joke? Okay. Then, as in terms of what we might recommend to the Committee of the Executive Office, for example, the receipt of departmental papers, timely transfer of information, the frequency of ministerial briefings. Actually, members, although we haven't heard from OFMDFM for some time, there are some particular reasons why that is, and actually over the course of the mandate, it might be reasonable to say that FMDFM and the junior ministers have not been particularly absent in terms of their appearance. It might just not have been spread in a timely manner as we might have desired. So I leave that for...
There's a point there, but my recollection, I haven't been on the committee throughout the mandate, but my recollection is that when they came, they only came for a limited period of time.
the juniors?
I think there was one instance when they came having pre-warned us that their time availability was limited, but the first time I remember FM and DFM coming, which was Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, I think it was Tom Elliott, and asked, what is your availability? And FM very clearly said, we are at the disposal of the committee, as it should be.
My own view is that ministers should attend the committee once every, it's a session, is it? Is that what you call it? Is that from, say,
Assembly sessions, yeah,
September to
August,
Christmas?
September to August.
I think they should come, that was the rule of thumb that I had.
Yeah.
My committee,
you would come
they didn't,
once
they
a
didn't ask
calendar
me to come that often, yeah, but my rule of thumb was I want to come every session. I think that should be the rule of thumb.
Yeah, well, I think we could maybe discuss that with them next week, but in terms of what we put in this report, members, are we content to say that as a rule of thumb we would expect to hear from OFMDFM once a session? And
Sure, can I clarify? Sorry, did you say August to December?
Is that a session or is that?
No, a session runs from September right through to the next August. So are you meaning, like a term basically?
Every term, once a term, yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry.
but once a term?
So that would be about 3 times?
Yeah.
3 times a year?
My understanding.
It'll be very much the case because FMDFM won't have juniors next time round.
Won't?
Definitely.
My assessment is that they're going elsewhere.
Right.
Well, my point was going to be the frequency with which FM and DF come surely depends on the frequency in which the juniors would come, if there are juniors. But you're not encouraging me to get on to Ladbrokes.
Given we're drawn towards the end of our session, Chair, I'll be fair for once. When FM and DFM,
You're not normally fair, Chris?
no, did attend, in my experience, they were here for a long
Reasonable
period of time.
yeah.
I'd go as far as say a long period of time, but given how infrequently, in my opinion, they attend, I think that's only right. There is no way to avoid the fact that, as far as I'm aware, the last time they were here was June 2014, which I think is startling.
Okay,
but on what, to get to the point, I've said previously, my understanding is that each department gets a quarterly report from its senior official team in terms of its progress against PFG targets. I see no real reason why the minister, accompanied by the senior team, could not attend in a reasonably concise way to extend that update to the relevant statutory committee. Which, I'm not down a ditch over what this says, but it definitely needs to make the point that it should be more frequent.
Could I make a proposal then, members? Certainly in terms of receipt of departmental papers, I think we're all agreed it should be within the protocols. In terms of the frequency of ministerial briefings, perhaps we should recommend to the next committee that they formalise once it is clear what the shape of the executive office will be, and particularly whether the ministers will have juniors. Because it would be surely reasonable to expect the juniors to come more frequently than the principals.
Just even on
I don't agree with that point.
I suppose the relationship in education, about a year ago, John came and talked about wanting to build a relationship, about getting legislation through, and that definitely helped over the last year. The Committee of Education definitely worked a lot better. I wonder, should we include something about engaging very early on with the ministers around, and I hate to use that phrase, fresh start, but something around like protocols, everything else. Because I've only been on this committee for a while, but it's clear that those sort of things need to improve.
You feel for us?
It's different.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But shall we?
I think actually, this is on to something there. If he's talking specifically in terms of here are issues we need to talk about, and here is when a briefing would be useful. I would be reluctant to say, the minister should come X number of times per year, because if they need to be brought here in order to discuss something before then that option obviously should be available. You'd rather have them here when you need them rather than just set an arbitrary figure.
Yeah, but then there's a question of who defines when you need them. So I think if we can find a compromise form of words that leaves it open, because if there are 4 ministers, clearly you would expect a more frequent appearance by a number of them. And if you only have 2 ministers, I would have thought. I mean, Alex may disagree with me on that.
I think your recommendation, Chair, given there will be potentially reduced responsibilities or different responsibilities at the very least, and perhaps different ministerial makeup, that is something that the committee, the new committee, can consider.
So something around very early engagement to establish the best way forward in terms
Yeah,
of
and
direct briefings and engagement.
Better time
With a committee that will want to work, because I'd say again, scrutiny does not mean criticism. Scrutiny can lead to praise. Beyond that, I hope it's fairly straightforward that we're recommending they keep a focus on programme for government and investment strategy, TBUC, the review of transfer functions, because remember we're recommending a 6-month review, the historical institutional abuse inquiry, age discrimination legislation, which is outstanding, refugee integration strategy, delivering social change, the social investment fund, and European matters. Anything left out?
Is sexual orientation strategy going elsewhere?
Communities.
Communities, okay. Gender equality strategy going to
Yeah.
communities as well, yeah.
So members, we have the current draft in your pack. We can update it and we'll bring it back for a final consideration next week. All content? Excellent. And this as well?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We also have an end of session report. While we're considering it separately today, it will go into the legacy. Still in draft form again, the following matters have been included in our list of achievements and activities over the last session. The number of meetings held, primary legislation, again the NIPSO, the Department's Bill, subordinate legislation, transfer of functions, the salaries, Assembly Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints Order, and the Public Services Ombudsman's salary, LCMs, the Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill, other scrutiny, TBUC, HIA, Victims and Survivors Service, Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme, age discrimination legislation and delivering social change. In terms of European issues, 5 briefings from the Office of the Executive in Brussels, EU reform, the EC-UK Forum, EU Equal Treatment Directive, and the report on the Assembly Committee priorities for European scrutiny. Are we content with that list? So an update end of session report will also be brought back to the committee for final consideration next week. Members, any other business? If not, we meet Wednesday the 9th, 2 p.m. here in room 30, where the primary order of business is a briefing from the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister. Meeting adjourned.